Dangerous Dimension by L. Ron Hubbard. Author's note. For reasons pertinent to the happiness of mankind, by request from the United States Philosophic Society, and the refusal of Dr. Henry Mudge, Ph.D., of Yarmouth University, the philosophic equation mentioned herein is presented only as equation C, without further expansion. L. Ron Hubbard. The room was neither mean nor dingy. It was only cluttered. The great bookcases had gaps in their ranks, and the fallen members lay limp-leaved on floor and table. The carpet was a snowdrift of wasted paper. The stuffed owl on the mantel was awry because the lined books there had fallen sideways, knocking the owl around and over to peck dismally at China on the globe of the world. The writing desk was heaped with tottering paper towers, and still Dr. Mudge worked on. His spectacles worried him because they kept falling down in front of his eyes. A spot of ink was on his nose, and his left hand was stained blue-black. The world could have exploded without in the least disturbing Yarmouth's philosophical professor. In his head whirled a maelstrom of philosophy and physics, higher mathematics, and if examined from within, he would have seemed a very brave man. Examined from without, it was a different matter. For one thing, Dr. Mudge was thin, and his head was far too big for his body. His nose was long and aquiline, and his eyes were unusually bright. His thin hands gripped book and pen as every atom of his being was concentrated upon his work. Once he glanced up at the clock with a worried scowl. It was 6:30, and he must be done in half an hour. He had to be done in half an hour. That would give him just enough time to rush down to the university and address the United States Philosophic Society. He had not counted on this abrupt stab of mental lightning. He had thought to deliver a calm address on the subject, was Spinoza right in turning down the professorship of blah, blah, blah. But when he had begun to delve into the key of Spinoza, a truly wonderful idea had struck him, and out he had sailed at 2 that day to dwell wholly in thought. He did not even know that he was cramped from sitting so long in one place.
Henry!
Came the clarion call. Henry failed to hear it.
Henry!
Again, he did not look up.
Henry Mudge, are you going to come in here and eat your dinner or not?
He heard that time, but with less than half an ear. He did not fully come back into the world of beefsteak and mashed potatoes until Mrs. Doolin, his housekeeper, stood like a thundercloud in the study door. She was a big woman with what might be described as a forceful personality. She was very righteous, and when she saw the state of that study, she drew herself up something on the order of a general about to order an execution.
Henry, what have you been doing? And look at you. A smudge on your nose and an ink spot on your coat.
Henry might fight the universe, but Mrs. Doolin was the boogeyman of Henry's life. 10 years before, she had descended upon him, and since that time...
Yes, Lizzie,
said Henry, aware for the first time of his stiffness, and suddenly very tired.
Are you coming to dinner or aren't you? I called you a half hour ago, and the beefsteak will be ruined. And you must dress. What on earth's gotten into you, Henry Mudge?
Yes, Lizzie.
He came slowly to his feet, and his joints cracked loudly.
What have you done to this place?
Some of the fire of enthusiasm swept back into Henry.
Lizzie, I think I have it.
And at that thought, swept even Lizzie Doolin out of the room as far as he was concerned. He took a few excited steps around the table, raised his glasses up on his forehead, and gleamed.
I think I've got it.
What?
The equation. Oh, this is wonderful. It's marvelous, Lizzie. If I am right, there is a condition without dimension. A negative dimension, Lizzie. Think of it. And all these years they've been trying to find the fourth positive dimension. And now, by working backwards...
Henry Mudge, what are you talking about?
But Henry had dived into the abstract again, and the lightning was flashing inside his head.
The negative dimension. Epistemology!
What?
He scarcely knew she was there.
Look, think of it. You know what you can do with your mind. Mentally, you can think that you're in Paris and zip, your mind is mentally taking you to Paris. You can imagine yourself swimming in a river and zip, you are mentally swimming in the river. But the body stays where it is. And why, Lizzie? Why?
Henry Mudge.
But there is a negative dimension. I'm sure there is. I've almost formulated, and if I can succeed...
Henry Mudge, your dinner is getting cold. Stop this nonsense.
But he had not heard her. Suddenly he gripped his pen and wrote, and on that blotted piece of paper was set down Equation C. He was not even aware of any change in him, but half his brain began to stir like an uneasy beast, and then the other half began to stir and mutter, and on the sheet before him was Equation C.
Henry Mudge, if you don't come in here and eat your dinner this very minute...
She advanced upon him, as an elephant moves upon the dog. Henry knew in that instant that he had gone too far with her, and half his brain recognized the danger in her. For years he had been in deadly terror of her.
I wish I was in Paris.
Henry shivered to himself, starting to back up.
Cognac, monsieur,
said the waiter.
Huh? What?
Gaped Henry, glancing up from the sidewalk table. He could not take it in. People were hurrying along the Rue de l'Epont, going home as the hour was very late. Some of the cafes were already closed.
Ah, cognac. En vin blanc, monsieur.
Insisted the waiter.
Really, I don't drink. Is this Paris?
Of certainty, monsieur. Perhaps one has already had a sip too much, eh?
No, I don't drink.
Said Henry. Frightened to be in such a position, the waiter began to count the snifters on the table.
Then monsieur has done well for one who does not drink. 40 francs, monsieur.
Henry guiltily reached into his pocket, but his ink-stained jacket was not his street coat. He had carpet slippers on his feet. His glasses fell down over his eyes, and his searching hands told him that he possessed not a dime.
Please, I am out of funds. If you would let me,
Then you will pay just the same.
Oh.
Gendarme!
Shivered Henry and imagined himself in the peaceful security of his study. Lizzie was gaping at him.
Why, where did you go? Oh, it must be my eyes. I know it must be my eyes. I mean, those fainting spells did mean something then. Yes, I am sure of it.
She glanced at the clock.
Look, you haven't eaten dinner yet. You come right into the dining room this instant.
Meekly, but inwardly aghast, Henry tagged her into the dining room. She set a plate before him. He was not very hungry, but he managed to eat. He was greatly perplexed and upset. Negative dimension had been there after all, and there was certainly no difficulty seeing into it and out of it. Mind was everything then, and body nothing. Or mind could control body, or... Oh, it was very puzzling.
What are you dreaming about? Get upstairs and get dressed. It's 7 this very minute.
Henry plodded out into the hall and up the stairs. He got into his room and saw that all his things were laid out. Oh, it was very puzzling, he told himself as he sat down on the edge of the bed. He started to remove one carpet slipper and then scowled in deep thought at the floor. 20 minutes later, Lizzie knocked at his door.
Henry, you're late already.
He started guiltily. He had not even taken that slipper off. If Lizzie found him in here, she was starting to open the door.
I ought to be there. This very minute.
Thought Henry, envisioning the lecture hall. And it startled him to see them filing into the lecture hall. He stood nervously on the platform, suddenly aware of his carpet slippers and ink-stained working jacket, and the spot on his nose and his almost black hand. Nervously, he tried to edge back. The dean was there.
Why, Dr. Mudge, I didn't see you come in.
The dean looked him up and down and frowned.
I hardly think that your present attire...
Henry visualized the clothes laid out on his bed and started to cough an apology.
That Henry? My heavens, where are you?
In here, Lizzie,
said Henry on the edge of his bed. She bustled into the room.
What? You're not dressed. Henry Mudge, I don't know what is happening to your wits. You will keep everybody waiting at the university.
No!
Groaned Henry, but it was too late.
My dear fellow,
said the dean, startled.
What happened to you? I was just saying that I scarcely thought it proper for you.
Please.
But that was as far as Henry got. Because instantly...
Oh my God. I know it's my eyes.
Stop. Don't say anything. Please don't say anything. Please, please, please don't say anything.
She was suddenly all concern.
Why, you're pale, Henry. Don't you feel well?
No, I mean, yes, I'm all right, but don't suggest anything.
But how could he state it? He was frightened half to death by the sudden possibilities which presented themselves to him. All he had to do was visualize anything, and that scene was the scene in which he found himself. All anybody had to do was suggest something, and zip, there he was. At first it had been a little difficult, but the gigantic beast, thought, had risen into full power.
You dress.
But he was afraid to start disrobing. What if he thought of... No, he must learn to control this. Somehow he had missed something. If he could get the entire equation straight and its solution, he would have the full answer. But thought was drunk with power and would not be denied. Henry rushed past Mrs. Doolan and down the steps to his study. He quickly sat in his chair and gripped his pen with determination. There was equation C. Now, if he could solve the rest of it, he would be all right. He only had to substitute certain values. Lizzie had followed him down.
Henry, I think you must be going crazy. I mean, imagine keeping all those men waiting in the lecture hall.
No!
Henry groaned and heard the dean say,
Well, it was to be our pleasure this evening to hear from Dr. Mudge on the subject of...
Somebody twitched at the dean's sleeve.
He's right beside you.
The dean looked, and there was Henry, tweed jacket, ink stains, carpet slippers, and all. Beads of perspiration were standing out on Henry's bulging forehead.
Well, go right ahead. I don't approve of your attire, but it's too late now.
Henry stood up, fiery red and choked with stage fright. He looked down across the amused sea of faces and cleared his throat. The hall quieted slowly.
Gentlemen, I have made a most alarming discovery. Forgive me for so appearing before you, but it could not be helped. Mankind has long expected the existence of a state of mind wherein it might be possible to follow thought. However,
his lecture presence broke as he recalled his carpet slippers. Voice nervous and key jumpy, he rushed on.
However, the arrival at actual transposition of person by thought alone was never attained, because mankind has been searching forward instead of backward. That is, mankind has been looking for the existence of nothing in the fourth dimension instead of the existence of,
He tried to make his mind clear. Stage fright was making him become involved.
I mean to say, the negative dimension is not the fourth dimension, but no dimension. The existence of nothing.
Some of the staid gentlemen in the front row were not so staid. They were trying not to laugh, because the rest of the hall was silent.
What idiocy is this man babbling?
Said the dean to the university professor behind his hand. Dr. Mudge's knees were shaking. Somebody tittered openly in the fourth row.
I mean that when a man imagines himself elsewhere, his mind seems to really be elsewhere for the moment. The yogi takes several means of accomplishing this, evidently long practiced in the negative dimension. Several great thinkers, such as Buddha, have been able to appear bodily at a distance when they weren't there, but they were when they were here. The metaphysicist has attributed supernatural qualities to the phenomenon known as a pour, in which people and such appear in one room without going through the door when they were in the other room.
Dear me, he thought to himself, this is a dreadful muddle. He could feel the truth behind his words, but he was too acutely aware of the stained jacket and carpet slippers and kept propping up his glasses.
If a man should wish to be in some other place, it is entirely possible for him to imagine himself in that place and diving back through the negative dimension to emerge out of it in that place with instantaneous rapidity. To imagine oneself.
He swallowed hard. An awful thought had hit him, big enough to make him forget his clothes and his audience. A man could imagine himself any place and then be in that place. Zip. But how could a man exert enough willpower to keep from imagining himself in a position of imminent destruction? If he thought, Mudge gritted his teeth, he must not think of any such thing. He must not. He knew instinctively that there was one place he could not imagine himself without dying instantly before he could recover and retreat. He did not know the name of the place, and the instant would not allow himself to think of it. A ribald young associate professor said hoarsely to a friend, loud enough for Dr. Mudge to hear, "He ought to imagine himself on Mars." Mudge didn't even hear the laugh which started to greet that sally. He examined the sandy wastes which stretched limitlessly to all the clear horizons. Bewildered, he took a few steps, and the sand got into his carpet slippers. A cold wind cut through the thin tweed jacket and rustled his tie.
Oh dear, now I've done it.
A high whining sound filled the sky, and he glanced up to see a pear-shaped ship streaking flame across the sky. It was almost gone before he had started. Dr. Mudge felt very, very much alone. He had no faith in his mental behavior now, and it might fail him. He might never get away. He might imagine himself in an emperor's palace with sentries. The diamond floor was hard on his eyes, and lights blazed all around him. A golden throne reared before him, and on top of it sat a small man with a very large head, swathed in material which glowed all of itself. Mudge couldn't understand a word that was being said because no words were being said, and yet they all hit his brain in a bewildering disarray. Instantly, he guessed what was happening. As a man's intention can be telepathed to a dog, these superior beings battered him mentally, as he had no brainwave selectivity. He had guessed that the human mind would so evolve, and he was pleased for an instant to find out that he'd been right. But not for long. He began to feel sick in the midst of this bombardment. All eyes were upon him in frozen surprise. The Emperor shouted and pointed a small wand. 2 guards leaped up and fastened themselves upon Mudge. He knew vaguely that they thought he was an inferior being, something like a chimpanzee or maybe a gorilla, and indeed so he was on their scale of evolution. The ruler shouted again. No! And the guards breathed hard and looked angrily at Mudge. Another man came sprinting over the diamond floor, a flare-barreled gun gripped in his hand. Mudge began to struggle. He knocked the guards aside with surprising ease. Wildly, he turned about, seeking a way out, too confused by the light, the thought waves, and sound to think clearly and remember. The man with a lethal-looking weapon braced his feet and leveled the muzzle at Mudge's chest. He was going to shoot, and Mudge knew that he faced a death-dealing ray. He was getting no more consideration than a mad ape, like that one in the Central Park Zoo. The guard was squeezing the Weakly, Dr. Mudge leaned on the railing of the Central Park Zoo in New York. He took out his handkerchief and dabbed at his forehead. Dully, he gazed up, knowing he would see an orangutan in the cage. It was late, and the beast slumbered in his covered hut. Mudge could only see a soft tuft of fur.
Thanks.
The night was soothing. He was exhausted with all the cross-currents which had battered his poor human mind and the thin air of Mars. He moved slowly along the rail. There was a sign there which said,
Gorilla, brought from the mountains of the moon by
Mudge groaned pitifully as he sank down on a rock in the freezing night.
This can't keep up. I would no more than start to eat when something would yank me away. I'd starve. And sooner or later, I'll think of a very dangerous place, and that will be the end of me before I can escape. Oh, there's one place in particular. Oh, no!
He screamed into the African night. The thought had not formed. One place he must never, never think about. Never. From his high peak, he'd see all of Africa spread before him. Glowing far off in the brilliant moonlight was Lake Tanganyika. Mudge was a little pleased with himself, just the same. Back at the lecture...
I am sorry and very puzzled.
The dean was saying, with his watch in his hand.
Why, Dr. Mudge should see fit to use magician's tricks to appear in such attire and generally disport himself.
I can't help it!
Wailed Mudge at his side. The dean almost jumped out of his shoes. He was annoyed to be startled out of his dignity, and he scowled harshly at Mudge.
Doctor, I advise you strongly that such conduct will no longer be tolerated. If you're trying to prove anything by this, an explanation would be most welcome. The subject is philosophy, and not Houdini's vanishing tricks.
Oh, don't say anything. Please don't say anything more. Just keep quiet. I mean, don't say anything, please.
The young man who had suggested Mars was not quite so sure of himself, but the dean's handy explanation of magic without paraphernalia restored his buoyancy.
I was just... No, I can't say where I was. Or I'll go back. This is very terrifying for me, gentlemen. There is one certain place I must not think about. The mind is an unruly thing. It seems to have no great love for the material body, as it willfully, so it seems, insists in this great emergency on playing me tricks.
Dr. Mudge, I know not what you mean by all this cheap pretension to impossibility.
No, I am pretending nothing. If I could only stop this, I'd be a very happy man. It is terribly hard on the nerves. Out of Spinoza, I wandered into force equations, and at 2 today, I caught a glimmer of truth in the fact that there was a negative dimension, a dimension which had no dimensions. I know for certain that mind is capable of anything.
It certainly is, even chicanery.
Oh, no, no.
Begged Mudge, pushing his glasses high on his forehead and then fishing in his pockets.
In my notes.
He looked squarely at the dean.
Here, I have proof of where I have been, sir.
He stooped over and took off a carpet slipper. He turned it upside down on the lecture table, and a peculiar glowing sand streamed out.
This is Martian sand.
Bosh!
Cried the dean, and he turned to the audience.
Gentlemen, I wish you to excuse this display. Dr. Mudge has not been well, and his mind is, unbalanced. A few hours' rest would be...
I'll show you my notes. I'll show you the equation. I left them home.
He had left them home in his study. Lizzie Doolin was muttering to herself as she picked up the papers from the floor and stacked them. The professor was certainly a madman this evening. Poor little man. He was turning, and she almost fainted. Dr. Mudge was sitting in his chair, getting his notes together.
Doctor, what are you doing there? How did you get in the house? The doors are all locked and... Oh, it's my eyes. It's my eyes. I mean, doctor, you know very well that you should be at the lecture.
He barely had time to cram the papers in his pocket and... well, you know what happened next. The dean was fuming.
Such tricks are known. Oh, there you are. Doctor, I am getting very sick of this. We all know, are all well versed in what can be done by trickery. Had this all started by your comings and goings.
It is not a trick. Look, I have my notes.
And suppose you brought back a vacuum from the moon this time.
It was so cold that Mudge was instantly blue all over. He could feel himself starting to blow up as the internal pressure fought for release. His lungs began to collapse, but his mind raced, torn between two thoughts. Here he was on the moon. Here he was, first man ever to be on the moon. And all the great volcanoes reared chilly before him, and an empty sea of dreams fell away behind him. Barren rock was harsh beneath his feet, and his weight was nothing. All in an instant he glimpsed it because he knew that he would be dead in another second, exploded like a penny balloon. He visualized the thing best known to him, his study. Lizzie was going out the door when she heard the chair creak. She forgot about the necessity for aspirin as she faced about. Mudge was in again.
Doctor!
Stormed Lizzie, an Amazon of fury.
If you don't stop that, I don't know what will happen to me. Here a minute, gone again, here and gone, here and gone. What is the world coming to? It's not my eyes. It can't be my eyes. I mean, I felt over the whole room for you, and not so much as a hair of your head was here. What kind of heathen magic have you been stirring up? You've sold your soul to
Stop!
Screamed Mudge. He sank back, panting. That had been close. But then that had not been as close as the other thing, which he dared not envision. He chopped the thought off and started back on another.
Maybe there is... Oh, I've got the test right here. Can I throw myself back and forth between life and death?
He had said the word.
Death!
He said it again, more distinctly, and still nothing occurred. He breathed easier. He could not go back and forth through time, as he had no disconnection with the time stream. He could whisk himself about the universe at will, or against his will, but he was still carrying on in the same hours and minutes. It had been dark in Africa, almost morning in Paris.
No!
He yelled. Lizzie jumped a foot and stared to see if Mudge was still in his chair.
Whatever are you up to? I mean, you frightened a body out of her wits.
Something awful is going on. I tried to tell you before dinner, but you wouldn't listen. I can imagine I am someplace and then be in that someplace. This very instant, I could imagine something and zip, I'd be someplace else without walking through doors or anything.
What? What are you? Oh.
Lizzie had almost broken forth anew, but it awed her a little. She had seen Mudge appear and disappear so often this evening that this was the only explanation which she could fit. Mudge looked tired.
But I'm afraid, Lizzie. I'm terribly afraid. If I don't watch myself, I might imagine I was in some horrible place such as... No! I imagine I was someplace where I was... No!
He yelled again. These shouts were like bullets to Lizzie Doolin. She was still a little awed. A little. Mudge held his head in his hands.
I'm in trouble. The dean will not believe what is happening to me. He calls me a... No!
What do you keep yelling for?
So I won't go sailing off. If I can catch a thought before it forms, I can stay put.
He groaned and lowered his head into his hands.
But I am not believed. They think me a cheat. Oh, Lizzie, I'll lose my professorship. We'll starve.
She was touched and advanced slowly to touch his shoulder.
Never you mind what they say about you. I'll beat their heads in, Henry, that I will.
He glanced up in astonishment at her. She had never shown any feeling for him in all these 10 years. She had bullied him and driven him and terrified him, but she was conscious of her tenderness and brushed it away on the instant.
But don't go jumping off like that again. Drive over to the university in your car, like a decent man should.
Yes, Lizzie.
He got up and walked toward the door. Her jaw was set again.
Mind what I tell you. Your car now and nothing fancy.
Yes, Lizzie. They're waiting for me.
He couldn't stop that thought, and the hall was clearly envisioned, and there he was. The dean had his hands on both hips as he saw that Mudge was here again. The dean wagged his head from side to side and was very angry, almost speechless. The audience tittered.
Have you no respect? How dare you do such things while I'm talking to you? I was saying that the next time you'll probably bring...
Shut up!
Shouted Mudge in desperation. He was still cold from his trip to the moon. The dean recoiled. Mudge was a very mild little fellow with never anything but groveling respect for everybody. Had these words from him?
I'm sorry. You mustn't say things or you'll send me off somewhere again. Now, don't speak.
Mudge, you can be assured that this performance this evening will terminate...
Don't! You might say something.
The audience was delighted, and laughter rolled through the hall. Mudge had not realized how this remark would sound. The dean had never been anything but overbearing, and now, with his dignity flouted, he turned white. He stepped stiffly to the president of the university. He said a few words in a low voice. Grimly, the president nodded.
Here and now, I am requesting your resignation, Mudge. This buffoonery cannot
Wait!
last.
Pleaded Mudge, hauling his notes from his pocket.
Please, first take a look at these and maybe you will see.
I care to look at nothing. You're a disgrace.
Look!
Pleaded Mudge, putting the papers on the lecture stand.
Just give me 1 minute. I'm beside myself. I don't mean what I say, But there is one thing I must not think about. One thing I can't think about. To think about. Look, here. See?
The dean scowled at the sheets of scribbled figures and symbols. Mudge talked to him in a low voice, growing more and more excited. The dean was still austere.
And there, right there, equation C. Read it.
The dean thought Mudge might as well be humored as long as he would be leaving in the morning for good. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Mudge's reports. His glance fastened on equation C. The dean was startled. He stood up straight, his logical mind turning over at an amazing pace.
That's very strange. My head feels...
Oh, what have I done?
Cried Mudge too late. The assistant professor in the front row, a man of little wit but many jokes, chortled, I suppose he'll go to Mars now. Mudge was almost in control by now. He knew that a part of equation C was missing, which would make it completely workable and usable at all times without any danger. He also knew that being here on this sandy plain was not very dangerous, unless one happened to think...
No!
He screamed into the Martian night. It was easy. All he had to do was visualize the classroom. Mudge took off his glasses and wiped them. Then he bent over and emptied the sand from his slippers. The hall before him was silent as death, and the men were staring in disbelief at the man on the platform. Mudge replaced the slipper. He took up a pencil and bent eagerly over his notes. He had to work this thing out before he imagined...
No!
He roared. It would be awful if he dreamed it. Dreaming, he would have no real control, and things would happen to him. The president rose cautiously and tapped Mudge's shoulder.
Where's the dean?
Mudge glanced around. True enough, the dean was not there. Mudge chewed at the end of his pencil in amazed contemplation.
Do you mean that statement about going to...
Shut up! The dean may find out how to get back. Unless he thinks of something
He swallowed hard.
Dr. Mudge, I resent such a tone.
Began the president.
I am sorry, but you might have said it. And the next time, I might fall into a Martian canal.
He was strangling as he fought through the depths. He broke the surface like a porpoise and swam as hard as he could, terror surging within him as these dark waters lapped over him. Ahead, he could see a houseboat with a beautiful lady sitting at the rail. He swam breaststroke, raising himself up to shout for help. The cold suddenness of the accident had dulled his brain, and he could not know what monsters lurked in these Martian depths. The woman was strangely like an Earth woman, for all that. Perhaps there were colonies of these people, much as there were colonies of chimpanzees on Earth. But the houseboat was silvery, and the woman dressed in luminous cloth. Strong hands yanked Mudge from the water, and he stood blowing upon the deck, water forming about his feet in a pool. The woman was staring at him. She was a beautiful thing, and Mudge's heart beat swiftly. She spoke in sibilant tones. He bowed to her.
No, I haven't any time for a visit or tea or anything. I'm sorry, but I'm busy at a lecture. No, I'm busy on Earth. No, I am busy.
Oddly enough, he knew that he could not speak her language, and yet he understood her perfectly as she placed her hand on his arm. Ah, it must be more telepathy, he thought.
Yes, it is telepathy.
Said her mind.
Of course, but I am astonished to see you. For years, ever since the Great Purge, no humans of our breed have been here. Alone with these yellow men as servants, I am safe enough. My parole was given because of certain favors.
Please, I have an appointment. Don't be alarmed if I vanish. I'll be back someday.
He looked around to fix the spot in his mind, feeling devilish for an instant. He bowed to her.
I must leave.
But you'll take cold.
She said, and she picked up a shawl of glowing material and threw it about his shoulders.
Thank you. And now I really must go.
Again, he bowed and envisioned a classroom. The water dripped to the lecture platform, and Mudge was getting really cold by now. He hauled the shawl more tightly about his arms and was aware of the protruding eyes all throughout the hall. The water dripped, and Mudge shivered again. He sneezed. It would be good.
No!
He shouted, and everybody in the hall jumped almost out of their chairs. Mudge turned to the president.
You see what you did?
The president was cowed, but he picked up in a moment.
Did you see the dean?
No!
The warm room was drying his clothes rapidly, and he rolled up his sleeves so that he wouldn't blot the paper. Feverishly, he began to evolve Equation D. He almost knew why he was working so fast. He was wholly oblivious of the audience. Very well he knew that his life depended upon his solving Equation D and thus putting the negative dimension wholly in his control. His pencil flew. The thought began to seep into his mind in spite of all he could do.
No!
Again, people jumped. There was a grunt at his elbow. And there stood the dean. He had sand in his gray hair, and he looked mussed up.
So, you got back.
It was terrible.
Don't say it!
Doctor, I apologize for all I've said to you.
He faced the crowd.
I can verify amply everything that has happened here tonight. Dr. Mudge is absolutely correct.
He paused to swab his face and spit sand out of his teeth.
About the negative dimension, I have an uneasy feeling, however, that it is a very dangerous dimension. A man might...
Stop!
Oh.
He was working at a terrific pace now, and the paper shot off the stand to the floor as he swept it aside. He grabbed a new sheet. He knew he was working against death, knew it with all his heart. That thought would not be long stayed. At any minute he might find out where he was that he dared not go. Equation D was suddenly before him. He copied it with a weary sigh and handed it to the dean.
Read that before you get any ideas.
The dean read it.
Mars.
Nothing happened. The dean began to breathe more easily.
Moon.
And still nothing happened. Mudge faced the audience.
Gentlemen, I regret the excitement here tonight. It has quite exhausted me. I can either give you equations C and D...
No! Said the dean. No! To a chorus, the crowd.
Oh, I'm frightened of it. I could never prevail upon myself to use it under any circumstances, less than a falling building. Destroy it!
Mudge looked around and everybody nodded.
I know this, but I will never write it again.
And so saying, he tore it up into little bits. His wet coat made it possible for him to wad the scraps to nothingness, never again to be read by mortal man.
Gentlemen, I am chilly. And so if you will excuse me, I will envision myself in my study.
Lizzie was crying.
No.
Her big shoulders shook as she hunched over the doctor's chair.
I just don't
I am not a poor little man.
She gasped as she stared up at him.
My chair, please.
She started to her feet.
Why, Henry Mudge, you're soaking wet. What do you mean by
I
coming in
don't
here?
mean anything by it, except that I fell in a Martian canal, Lizzie. Now be quick and get me some dry clothes and a drink of something.
You know you don't drink.
I don't drink because I knew you didn't like it. Bring me some of that medicinal whiskey, Lizzie. Tomorrow, I'll make it a point to get some good scotch.
Henry!
Don't talk like that. I'm warning you that you had better be pretty good from now on.
Henry,
Stop that. I won't have it. I refuse to be bullied in my own home. I tell you. And unless you are very, very good, I am liable to vanish like that.
No, don't. Don't do that. Henry, please don't do that. Anything you say, Henry, anything. But don't pop off like that anymore.
Henry beamed upon her.
That's better. Now go and get me some clothes and a drink. And be quick about it.
Yes, Henry.
But even so, she did not feel badly about it. In fact, she felt very good. She whisked herself upstairs and trotted down again in a moment. She placed the whiskey and water beside his hand. Henry dug up a forbidden cigar. She did not protest.
Get me a light.
She got him a light.
If you want anything, dear, just call.
That I will, Lizzie.
And he put his feet upon the desk, feeling wicked about it, but enjoying it just the same. His clothes were almost dry. He sank back, puffing his cigar, and then took a sip of the drink. He chuckled to himself. His mind had quieted down. He grinned at the upset owl. The thought which had almost hit him before it came to him now, it jarred him for an instant, even made him sweat, but he shook it off, and he was very brave.
The sun.
Said Henry Mudge, coolly, taking another drink.